The wife of a Holland area man accused in the 1987 murders of his sister and her husband took the stand for a second day of testimony this morning. Ryan Weingarten is charged with the cold case murders of Gail and Rick Brink.
3 can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. One Michigan man took this quote to heart, ending 2 lives to hide his past. Hi, and welcome back to Mysterious 7. I'm Corey. Today, we look into a bizarre tale of secrets, incest, and murder. This is a case of jealousy and a man willing to kill to keep a secret. If you still haven't subscribed to our channel, please hit the subscribe button and press the notification bell below. Let's dive right into this strange story without any further ado. Our story takes us to Holland, Michigan, a town rich in Dutch heritage and culture. Small-town charm and picturesque views make for a wholesome atmosphere. Newlyweds Gail and Rick Brink lived just to the north in Park Township. It was an ideal location for the ambitious couple. They were eager to get started on renovating their new home, ready to fulfill their dreams of starting a family. Unfortunately, jealousy and secrets shattered those dreams. Pam Weingarten kept a dark secret. For 25 years, she hid the truth to keep her job, her family, and her reputation safe. The agony of knowing, yet being unable to tell anyone, finally came to an end on January 18, 2013. Sitting down with detectives, Pam finally began to tell them the terrible secret she'd been holding on to all of these years. Driven by love and fear, Pam allowed herself to be controlled by the man she married. He controlled every aspect of her life. He decided who she was allowed to talk to and interact with. He'd even threatened her life. But it was too much now. For 25 years, she lived with the knowledge of how Gail and Rick Brink were killed. She lived with and loved their murderer, her husband, Ryan Weingarten. Gail Weingarten was 19 and Rick Brink 22 when they met at work in 1984. Mesmerized by her, Rick told his mother Isla that he'd met the woman he was going to marry. Hailing from a less fortunate background, Gail was one of 8 children. Gail was ambitious and knew what she wanted out of life. When she met Rick, it was destiny. Equally ambitious, Rick spent his days spoiling Gail, and they both found in each other the ideal partner. All that was left to do now was to start working together to build the life they wanted. Gail, however, was still in the process of ending her previous relationship. She'd been living with a serious boyfriend, Lars, at the time. Ending the relationship was not easy. Allegedly, Lars did not take the breakup well and confronted Gail. The fight ended up becoming physical, and Gail sought help from her older brother Ryan after Lars hit her. With the issue settled, Gail was now ready to move in and start something new with Rick. Not long after, she and Rick were an item, leaving their pasts behind to focus on a future together. On April 25, 1986, Rick married Gail, a day after her 21st birthday. The couple were looking to buy a home together after returning to Holland, Michigan from their honeymoon. They'd found the perfect one, a ranch-style house surrounded by 20 acres of land. Even better was that it sat on the outskirts of town, affording them privacy as they began their new life together. Rick was able to negotiate a deal with the bank and bought the property at a bargain price. The house, though, was in serious need of repair. Fortunately, Rick's work, training apprentice carpenters, helped significantly when it came to renovations. Gail and Rick moved into the house in 1987, renovating the property as they went along. Marriage, a new house, and successful careers meant one thing to them. It was time to start building a family together. But all those plans were about to change. On November 21, 1987, Gail and Rick attended one of his high school friends' weddings. People recalled seeing the pair having a great time reconnecting with old friends. This was the last time anyone would see Rick and Gail Brink alive. On November 23, 1987, neither Rick nor Gail showed up for work. This was very unusual, as they were both steadfast and diligent at their jobs. They wouldn't skip work without calling. Rick's parents, Gareth and Isla Brink were surprised when his employer called them that day to tell them of his absence. They both drove to the couple's house on Ransom Street. Rick's SUV was still parked in the driveway. What they saw next was a parent's worst nightmare. Rick was slumped across the front seat, a bullet wound to the head. They called the police immediately. Ottawa County Sheriff's Department officers arrived and secured the scene. On further inspection of the house, they discovered Gail lying dead in the couple's waterbed. Her face had been covered with a bloodied pillow. When it was lifted, police saw that she had been shot 3 times. Both Rick and Gail were shot execution style. They had only been married for 18 months at the time. Nothing else in the house had been disturbed. The crime was a head-scratching mystery, and officers baffled. Initially, the crime scene looked like a murder-suicide. Officers thought Rick may have shot her and then went outside and shot himself. This theory was quickly ruled out. After moving the bodies, no gun was found anywhere in the household or the SUV. Police began investigation into the murder. If it wasn't a murder-suicide, could it have been a robbery? When looking closely, crime scene investigators noted that nothing was out of place. There was money found lying around the house, but nothing had been touched. There was no sign of forced entry. No sign of a struggle, as furniture was upright and in place with nothing broken. No items stolen. Both Rick and Gail still had their jewelry on. No money had been taken from either of their wallets. The house was clean with little to no evidence being found at the scene. Police determined the weapon used was a .22 caliber revolver. The gun was not found at the house. There were no shell casings left behind, only the bullets recovered from the victims. What police were able to find were fingerprints, 6 to be exact, 4 of which belonged to the couple. The other 2 were of unknown origin. One was found on the toilet seat, the other on the telephone. They were put through the system but came back without any matches. With no physical evidence to go on, police began looking into their pasts. Speaking to family and friends, investigators started to paint a clearer picture of the couple before the murder. Gail's older brother Ryan said, "They were the nicest people in the world. I've never seen a couple get along the way they did." As investigations progressed, Ryan brought up a possible suspect, Gail's ex-boyfriend Lars. He was allegedly bitter following the breakup. After tracking Lars down, he admitted to the assault on Gail, but said he would not have murdered the newlyweds. He agreed to take a polygraph test and provided an alibi for the night of the murder. Lars was ruled out as a suspect. Police went back to the drawing board. No one raised any red flags, despite investigating friends and family close to the couple. It was a sad goodbye as Rick and Gail were laid to rest. Rick's brother, Bud Brink, said the funeral was a heartbreaking moment. The pastor even said, "This was not the work of the Lord. It is the work of the devil." Family members were devastated, especially Gail's older sister Cheryl and brother Ryan. As the family said their goodbyes, police began looking at different angles of the case. With no leads, theories began to develop. One such possibility was a case of mistaken identity. The previous owner of the house, a man called Shotgun Sid, was a notorious member of a biker gang. Up until before the house was repossessed from him, he'd been trafficking drugs for the gang. However, he grew disillusioned after noticing the gangs were starting to encourage teenagers to illicit drugs. He turned informant, therefore creating some tension within the biker gang circle. Sid had been attacked various times at his home, the Ransom Street address now belonging to Gail and Rick. Now, police began to wonder if, in fact, Sid had been the intended target. Together with Sid, police looked into the possibilities that perhaps the biker gangs in Detroit may have been responsible for the double homicide. Nothing panned out. All leads turned up dead ends. A month later, on December 24, 1987, another crime rocked the community. Deborah Wilson was found dead in the backyard by her husband, Rock. Her throat had been slit. Speculation began as the similarities to the murders piqued in interest. The couple had lived a half-mile apart from one another. No forced entry, nothing stolen or disturbed, and no clear motive. This made the community and investigators feel a possible serial killer may have been on the loose. This theory was also soon thrown out as police looked into the differences. Rick and Gail were killed execution style, meaning the murders were deliberate and they were likely the intended targets. Another theory then came to light. Gail had been investigating financial irregularities at her workplace. A file she had brought home was missing from the crime scene. After much investigation, this theory, too, was eventually ruled out. Police had exhausted all leads and the case went cold. However, the community never forgot the murders of Rick and Gail. In 2007, 2 decades after the murders, a team of investigators started a cold case unit within the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department. This unit was headed by detectives Venus Repper and Dave Blakely. The Brink murder was one of the cases they'd been focusing on. The paperwork was old, but detectives were able to recover key notes and reports. Repper and Blakely threw themselves into the case. After reviewing the old statements, they noticed some interesting points and a steady pattern developing. Interviews with friends and family members started to highlight the name of one individual, a person close to Gail, her older brother, Ryan Weingarten. He had allegedly said some strange things. Family members recalled that at family gatherings, Ryan would behave strangely. He'd told a family member that he could picture someone walking down the hallway to Gail's bedroom and described the scene with chilling accuracy. Ryan's other sister, Cheryl, remembered that he remarked, "You know, sometimes I wonder if I could have done this." On a separate occasion, he confided in his sister, Lynn. He said to her that he wanted to apologize to Gail because he felt like he raped her. His statements and remarks seemed at odds with the previous investigation. Ryan had been ruled out as he had given them a solid alibi. This alibi was corroborated by his then-girlfriend, Pam. She alleged to have been with him doing laundry on the night of the murder. Her story matched Ryan's, and so he was cleared as a possible suspect. They had gone to a friend's house to use their washing machine and help out with some babysitting. After scrutinizing the reports, detectives noticed a discrepancy in Pam's statements and polygraph test. Her statement provided a strong alibi for Ryan on the night of the murders. Her polygraph test told a different story. When asked by the polygraph examiner if she had been with Ryan on the night of the murders, she said no. There was no sign of deception on that question. Pam was fast becoming a person of interest. Detectives decided to pay her a visit at the trailer park home she shared with Ryan and their children. By now, Pam and Ryan had been married for 23 years and had 3 children together. Pam met Ryan in 1987 and was already a single mother to a 6-month-old boy from a previous relationship. They married in 1989 and had been together ever since. Detectives Repper and Blakely arrived at the couple's trailer and were met by Ryan. Since marrying Pam, Ryan had become a house husband and was homeschooling their 3 children. He explained that Pam was not at home, and detectives decided to ask him about his version of the events on the night of the double homicide. Ryan's recalling of the night was vague at best. They wanted to talk to Pam as well, but seeing as she was not there, they arranged for a later meeting with her at the sheriff's department. A date was agreed upon, and Ryan escorted Pam to the department. When he insisted he wanted to be there for the interview, detectives explained that it was not allowed. They needed to talk to Pam alone. Pam's story did not change. She maintained both her and Ryan's alibi. Nonetheless, Repper and Blakely still believed that something was off, and they were not giving up so easily. It was time to dig into the couple's background. Looking back into Ryan and Pam's relationship, detectives discovered Ryan had not always been faithful to Pam. While dating Pam, he had also been in a relationship with a woman, Crystal Niekamp Beelan. Crystal and Ryan had been together for 4 years in an on-again, off-again relationship. Crystal finally ended the relationship when Pam and Ryan became more serious. They had, however, remained friends. Detectives Repper and Blakely made contact with Crystal, and she willingly came into the department to speak to them. The interview went forward without incident. Nothing incriminating came up during the actual interview. But then, Crystal exposed a secret that flipped the case on its head. Ryan admitted to Crystal about an incestuous relationship he had had with Gail when they were younger. He and Crystal went for a drive a few days after the murder. At first, Ryan wanted to go by the crime scene. Crystal told him that she felt uncomfortable going there, and they decided to go to a nearby park instead. Ryan needed to talk. At the park, he told Crystal there was something he needed to get off of his chest. A terrible secret. Ryan then told Crystal about a sexual relationship that occurred between himself and Gail. The relationship began when he was 12 years old, and Gail was around 9 years old. It started off as innocent touching and exploring. As they grew older, however, it progressed to a bit more than groping. Ryan insisted that the entire relationship was consensual. Even though a child of 9 years old cannot legally consent to anything. He admitted, however, that the final time he propositioned Gail was in the family backyard. Gail refused his advances, and he forced himself upon her anyway. He then showed Crystal a picture of Gail, himself, and Rick on a boat trip. Gail was in a bikini, and Ryan remarked, "Look how hot she is." While on the trip, Ryan told Crystal that he could not keep his eyes off of Gail. He lusted after her, but it seemed he was the only one aware of the situation. Rick had caught him staring. Ryan figured Rick may have known about his previous indiscretions with his sister. Crystal's confession of the secret Ryan shared with her gave detectives a new angle to investigate. Ryan may have been abusing his sister throughout their childhood. Although he stated that it was consensual, it may have been his own way of lessening the guilt. It also gave Ryan a motive to cover up the misdeeds of his youth. The confession was not enough to charge Ryan, so they needed to dig a little deeper. They needed to speak to Pam. Appointments were made to interview Pam. Both Ryan and Pam arrived at the sheriff's department together. He insisted he wanted to be a part of the interview, and detectives had a tough time getting him to cooperate. Eventually, he gave in, and Pam began the interview. She admitted to giving a false testimony. She explained that yes, she had been with Ryan doing laundry, but he had left for a few hours. When he returned, they had both smoked marijuana and had sex before he left again. She told detectives that Ryan had insisted she provide him with an alibi for the night of the murders and threatened to kill her if she didn't do so. This was repeated so many times over the years that she was terrified to tell a soul, even before the current interview, to keep to her word. Still, Pam would not speak about the alleged incestuous relationship between Gail and Ryan. She didn't believe her husband was capable of murder either. He may have given a false alibi, but that was all, said Pam. She remained steadfast in her stance on his innocence. After Pam's interview, Ryan was then questioned about the double homicide. It was Detective Blakely who raised the question about his relationship with Gail. Ryan played ignorant at first. Blakely inquired further about the sexual relationship they shared. The tension in the room grew palpable. "Well, it was just kids' play," Ryan responded. To detectives, Ryan looked as if he was downplaying the accusations. Repper and Blakely did not believe it was ever consensual, as Ryan stated. However, they had nothing to hold him on. He was released, and over the next few days, his behavior would grow erratic. Ryan continued to make several calls to the detectives. He flipped back and forth between praising and berating the investigation team. To detectives, Ryan's behavior proved to be both unstable and unpredictable. These, however, were not grounds to charge Ryan with the murders. Attempts to contact Pam were blocked by Ryan. He was making it difficult to continue investigating the case. Repper and Blakely were determined to get to the bottom of this case. Unfortunately, it would be years before they would get the break they needed. In order to speak to Pam, Ryan had to be kept in the dark. In January 2013, they approached Pam at her workplace. She agreed to speak to them privately. Detectives explained that it was their job to get to the truth, and things weren't adding up. This meant they were not going away anytime soon. Under an enormous burden of guilt, Pam agreed to meet detectives at the sheriff's department. On January 18, 2013, the truth was finally revealed. In 1987, Pam was a newly single mother of one. She had only been dating Ryan for a few months when Gail and Rick were murdered. Ryan's supportive nature kept her attached to him, even though he was not the father of her child. She began by telling them that they had, in fact, visited the laundromat that evening. Then her story slowly changed from previous statements made. Ryan had left alone and returned a few hours later. He then left again. On Sunday morning, Ryan had come to her, distraught. He'd been banging on her door, desperate to talk. When she let him in and asked what was wrong, Ryan confessed to shooting and killing both Rick and Gail. He told Pam that a family problem had come up and escalated into a full-blown argument. The issue allegedly involved Ryan and Gail's parents. They had just sold their home and were living in a camper along with Ryan and Gail's two younger siblings. Ryan wanted Gail to help by allowing them to park their camper and live in the driveway of their spacious home. They could no longer camp at Ryan's house because the city council had sent a letter to Ryan explaining that the camper was in violation of city laws. Gail was opposed to the idea. She did not want her two younger brothers, who were disrespectful and frequently in trouble, to be anywhere near their new home. Ryan left, feeling angry, but returned, claiming he was having car troubles. When Rick came out to his SUV to get something to help Ryan, he took this as his opportunity. Ryan shot Rick twice in the head. Afterward, he went inside and shot Gail 3 times as she lay in bed. He told Pam he killed them because they believed they were better than the rest of the family. Pam was shocked by the confession and told Ryan to leave. He later called her and asked if he could see her again, to which she had agreed. Ryan claimed that he was going to take her back to his house. Pam gathered up her son and all 3 left. But Pam was in for a rude awakening. Ryan drove her to the crime scene. He wanted to show her, to prove to her, what he was capable of. To avoid being seen near the house, Ryan and Pam parked a short distance away. Rick's SUV was parked in the driveway. She looked in and found his body laying across the front seat. Ryan then grabbed her wrist and dragged her into the house and up the hallway. In the master bedroom, Gail lay dead. She looked as if she was asleep. Ryan pulled up the pillow he had placed over her face and remarked, "Isn't she beautiful?" Then he turned to her and said, "If you go to the police or tell anybody what I did here, this could happen to you." She ran from the house in fear. Nonetheless, she stayed with Ryan at his house that night. The next morning, they simply continued their lives as if nothing had happened. Pam asked him to drop her off at home because she needed to get ready for work. Before leaving, though, Ryan pulled her aside and showed her the weapon he used and the clothes he'd been wearing during the murders. The evidence was stashed in his car. As he drove her home, he repeated the threat. He swore her to secrecy, and then he created the alibi that she'd use for years to come. When Pam again asked why he killed both Rick and Gail, he finally admitted the truth. He had had a sexual relationship with Gail in their youth, and he was afraid that Rick already knew, or would find out. He also admitted that on top of everything else, he was jealous of the couple's success. Ryan himself had not progressed much in life. He was getting by selling petty drugs to make a small living. After he married Pam, she became the sole breadwinner while he stayed home, raising and schooling the children. He was jealous of his sister's new husband, jealous of his home, his career, and most of all, his loving relationship with Gail. It simply ate him up inside to see her so successful and happy with another man. Ryan was quickly taken into custody following Pam's statement. Pam's confession was the key to solving the mystery of the Brink's murders. Ryan maintained he did not murder the Brinks. He only confessed to having a sexual relationship with Gail. For the families, the arrest was double-edged. The Brink family were relieved to finally get closure after Ryan's arrest. For Dorothy Weingarten, the matriarch of the family, she refused to accept Ryan's involvement in the murder of his sister Gail. Other family members, however, were more accepting of the outcome. He had, after all, behaved very strangely following the murders of Gail and Rick. Following the arrest, police searched Ryan Weingarten's home. They found a .22 caliber rifle, but nothing else. The murder weapon and clothing were never recovered, which was not surprising considering how much time had passed. The fingerprints lifted from the crime scene were also not a match. But despite lack of physical evidence, the motive was strong enough. Ryan was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The trial began in March 2014 at the Ottawa County Circuit Court. The prosecution argued that Ryan was motivated by jealousy and feared that Gail was going to expose their incestuous relationship. 60 witnesses took to the stand to testify against him, but it was Pam Weingarten's testimony that sealed his fate. Ryan began hurling insults at Pam as she testified. He was reprimanded by the court and had to be removed from the courtroom. Pam explained her dysfunctional marriage to Ryan to the jury, and about the evening he took her to see Rick and Gail's bodies. A fellow inmate testified that Ryan boasted about the killings and how he wanted to end the life of another sister, Cheryl, for pushing the police investigation forward. Ryan took to the stand. His testimony was a wild ride, as he insisted the authorities were conspiring against him. He claimed they needed to close the case and were making him a scapegoat. Ryan also claimed that the police had brainwashed his wife, Pam, into giving false testimony. On March 28, 2014, the jury delivered their verdict. Ryan Weingarten was found guilty on both charges of murder. A month later, at his sentencing, he ranted and raved for a full hour. The judge threatened to have him gagged if he didn't stop his tirade. Finally, he was sentenced to 2 life terms, without the possibility of parole. Gail and Ryan's sister, Cheryl, felt devastated knowing the pain Gail must have been going throughout her childhood. She explained that although she loves her brother, she hated the person he became. Ryan and Gail's mother, Dorothy Weingarten, never accepted the verdict. She passed away in 2021 at the age of 90. Pam subsequently divorced Ryan. Ryan has lost all appeals he made, and to this day remains behind bars. Cases such as this one are devastating for all involved. No one wins. Not only did Ryan kill 2 young people who were just starting their lives together, he also tore apart his own family with despicable actions. What do you think of this bizarre case? Let us know in the comments below as always. Until next time,